thank you guys for coming in. Thanks for taking the time to listen in. This is part 3 of our 4-part series. This involves empathy. In the first one, we covered self-awareness and how that is important to you, how that really can change a lot of aspects. We broke that down from a physical, a mental, a spiritual, and then last we ended with emotional. And then in our second part series, we broke down emotional intelligence and what that means. So after we were able to decipher things within self, understand some different things, getting into the emotional side, which is our data feed and how that is processed in our head, how we think about things, where that comes from. So we dissected that down a lot. And now that we understand ourselves, how we receive, how that emotional data feed comes in, how we process that, we'll get into empathy, as that involves relating to others and connecting with others, whether that be from a business, mentor leadership aspect, whether that be a parenting aspect, or even socially within relationships with your significant other, to family relations, friends, and so on. So break and dissect that down. Also split up the differences where a lot of people get lines blended between sympathy and empathy, how to identify and look at some of those, and give you guys some examples and then some things that will help you raise your empathetic awareness, as empathy is one of those skills that requires a lot of honing, a lot of understanding, relatability. It's one that requires action. So this is my lovely partner here, Janita. So she's going to give you some aspects more on parenting side. I'll break down some of the leadership side of things, and then together with your guys' feedback and input, some of the other social aspects, some of the other situational things that maybe we can help you understand, or break down and dissect a little bit, then make them relatable.
Yeah. And if you missed the 2 episodes, we have it on YouTube, and it really does emphasize how starting with self really does help in this series. So starting with self and identifying the emotions, you kind of expand out to external other people, because what you know about yourself is the extent that you can understand and know people. So if you guys missed that one, go ahead and go back. We have it up on YouTube, and hopefully it'll make sense to you. But I think we're going to tie things together, bounce back and forth between what we've talked about and stuff like that.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
we'll start with empathy. Empathy is your ability to connect or relate with another person's perspective or situation. Some would say it's putting yourself in that other person's shoes or seeing it from their eyes. It gives you the ability to connect with people, where sympathy is more of a I'm sorry, but you don't really have a whole lot of emotion or attachment or anything like that to it. Where empathy requires an action, and that's something that we'd like to prove with you. Where sympathy can kind of borderline where empathy takes over, but empathy ultimately requires action for you to do something. An easy way for me to remember whether I'm being sympathetic or empathetic is just word relatability. With sympathy is things like saying. It is just a verbal, acknowledgement of a person's situation. It's generally simple. It's also very superficial. I'm sorry about that. I'm sorry to hear that. That's unfortunate. Where empathy requires an effort, as I said, it's an action. It requires energy. It requires you to connect with that other person. It also requires you to be more embedded, where on the flip side with being sympathetic is just superficial. Empathy requires you to be more embedded with that person. Therefore, you sit with them. Another way to break that down is sympathy comes more from ego. That comes from more of, I'm sorry to hear that, but I'm not putting any effort or any energy or anything towards it. It's a simple apology, and then you just move on with your day. You don't let that affect you. Whereas empathy is more from a heart space, where in that case you're connecting with people. That is more of a I hurt with you, where sympathy is I care in a lot of aspects, but with empathy you sit with that person, you actually go through that experience and you actually feel it. So I hurt with you, I feel with you. So that's where I say it requires a lot more action, it requires some energy. You have to be vulnerable when you're putting yourself in that position. Whereas if you just kind of have your guard up, you can be sympathetic and say, hey, I'm sorry to hear that, and move on about your day, or I'm praying for you, or we're thinking of you. But to actually sit and hear that person out is where that comes in with the action part.
Yeah, it is. And I like how you put that because, and some of us are, and this is where I kind of want to talk to my empath, is sometimes that emotion is hard. It's really, when you feel the other person, you can feel it to the depths of your soul. And sometimes you don't realize that. And, you just go off and you change the subject really quick because you yourself don't want to feel that emotion. Right. So, when we see it in that way, hence, like I said, you have to start with self to really process those emotions in order to help someone go through it with them.
Right. Yeah. So now you can show your concern, you can show your care by being sympathetic in a situation, but empathy is where you spend time with the people and actually break that down. And the three most common categories for empathy is your cognitive empathy, where you're aware of a person's situation. The emotional side where you actually feel with them, where you are connected with them. Maybe you share a similar experience, and then you get to your compassionate, or your empathetic concern, where you're just trying to help see them through that situation and come to a resolve. Now, that's the most common that we all kind of go to. We'll also explain why that's problematic in some situations and where it's not necessary. Help you guys tie together that self-awareness, that emotional IQ, so you know which application is best for whatever situation that you're faced with. We'll give you some kind of key pointers on how to, enter that situation, and then also how to, see through it so it comes out with a positive outcome.
Mm-hmm.
So with empathy, you don't have to have gone through a person's situation to be able to empathize with them. That's something also really important to know. But when you do go through an experience, or you have had something similar as they do, it does help it become more relatable, and it's easier for you to tap into those feelings of when you were in that situation, or you had somebody close to you going through something similar. Like I said, it helps with that relatability, whereas, if you're unfamiliar with it, you can use your imagination a whole lot, and actually feel what it would be like to put yourself in that person's situation. So the first thing that we'll start with is the cognitive empathy. That's the one that most people are aware of, and a lot of those skills kind of come innately, to you, where even subconsciously you understand. That is where you begin the process of acquiring information and you begin to process it, in that person. You can walk into a room and you can see when people are down or they're sad. You can read the energy of the room. You can look at the expressions on people's face. Even if you didn't have the ability to see, you'd be able to hear the words and everything that are going on around you, where you could perceive what the energy of that room is. So that's where we start relying on our senses. We really start to figure things out and start to process that data that's coming in and start to see how we feel about it. That allows you to relate with that person, with what's going on. And on this one, I think one of the more important parts of it is this is where you hold space for that person. This is where you would spend a lot more time listening than you would talking. You would encourage them to get things out, understand their perspective, because that's really what you're trying to do. And it's probably, I guess, for us guys, it's probably the hardest. That's where you have to sit and you have to listen and not offer your solutions and not jump to your Mr. Fix-It, make everything right, make everything better type of a situation. That you actually understand what they are going through, and it's an opportunity for you to really connect. And that's what empathy is a lot of connection between people, and it's understanding where they're coming from and why.
Right. Or, for a parent, as a mom, you're trying to fix all the problems for the kids. So it kind of, as the role you are taking, it affects how you're handling the situation, right? Do you want to fix it for them, or do you just need to hold space for them, allowing them to navigate their own way to understanding or healing it, or going through the process? And those are two different things. One, you're dishonoring their experience and taking that experience and not letting them learn themselves, or the other one where you hold space and let them talk through it, you're allowing them to navigate their own way
Right.
and empowering them in that way. So, yeah.
No, and that's where they'll actually learn and understand things and figure them out on their own. It's great to help guide people, but sometimes people need to find those things out on their own. And that's why them navigating through their own experience and you just holding space and an understanding of what they're trying to discover or they learn can really make a big difference.
Yeah.
I mean, us as leaders or as parents can always shout out the answers. We don't necessarily know everything. And so sometimes we like to say though too, is you gotta fuck around and find out sometimes. And that's where a lot of the learning occurs, is through that trial and error. So we understand that human nature of wanting to help people, and that's usually our go-to, is you want to take them out of that suffering. You want to resolve that issue for them. And sometimes that resolution actually just comes differently by sitting with them. Mm-hmm. A lot of times where, like, and as an example, is if somebody has something happen to them, such as a job loss or a relationship, that they, just got out of. In that situation, they could be, going through a lot of stress. You may think that job wasn't right for them. That guy or that gal wasn't right for them. They didn't need to be in that relationship. But instead, you bite your tongue and you actually listen through their situation and you understand where their heartache is coming from or where their disappointment or their lack of is coming from without offering up your solutions, at least not right away. You start with hearing them out and understanding how that's affecting them. Maybe in that relationship situation, you're understanding, like their emptiness or their lack of or feeling where they're coming short at. You can offer that assistance later, but you don't want to make them feel isolated, as in you're against them and they're left feeling misunderstood or not heard. That seems to be a commonality with a lot of people, is they just want to be heard. They want somebody to understand where they're coming from and why, and not have that judgmental or have that solution or that answer-oriented response.
Right. I agree. And there's times where just talking about it loud helps that person.
Yeah.
Because when you're in your own mind, you really don't hear yourself. But when you talk about it, you tend to hear it in a different way. And that's really good. And of course, the other thing that we don't want, and I say this a lot, is to honor the emotion. And and for some people, it might take a day to honor it, as far as like feeling it. Don't suppress it. Because, we all know that's where depression comes from, is we don't express our feelings. So as a person who is empathizing with somebody, you want to create and hold that space for them, for their emotions to be expressed. The last thing you want to do is, say, oh, I'm sorry, let's go get some sandwich.
Yeah, that's all right, get over it. Yeah,
but, and this will go back to our self-awareness and emotional intelligence of, how do you know when an emotion is ruling you?
Yeah.
Right? So you start to understand, okay, I've been in my emotions long enough that it's not serving me right now.
Yeah.
Let's go figure out what to do with it. But so
well, in the cognitive stage of it is where you're acquiring information. You're reading the room, you're reading, your audience in that, and listening to them. If you're not actively listening and seeing what they're putting emphasis on, they're not necessarily asking for you to fix it. And I think that's where us guys get lines blended, where it's, well, we're solution oriented. We want to fix it and we want to move on. What's the next problem? All right, fix that. What's next? Where sitting and understanding and feeling, having somebody being heard, lets them know that they have an advocate and at least they're not alone in the situation. And, we'll talk later in some of our other segments about energy vampires, where people are just draining from you. Janita's got a fantastic situation where she was talking with a gal who was providing, like cosmetic services, getting her hair done. And in that situation, she had just gotten out of a relationship, and her perspective was way off, I guess, from... It was common. Her perspective of the situation was common, where she was blaming outwardly. It was the other person's fault and so on and so forth, and feeling hurt and feeling victimized, to an extent. And Janita, having read that situation and understanding it, met it with some assessed the situation cognitively, also had been through a situation where she's been, out of a relationship before and gone through breakups, and was able to shine a different perspective and really meet that young lady in a situation, show some compassionate empathy, which we haven't gotten to, and some empathetic concern, just to help shine a different light, give that person a different perspective. If you want, go ahead and you can share how that kind of went, but it was really pretty cool and impactful.
Yeah. So, the whole hair appointment, she told me about, her situation, and I provided the safe space of just holding space for her to express what happened and all that. And, relating to her, I understand I've been through it myself, and this is what happened. And so being aware, cognitive aware of her situation, held that space and related, connected to her. But the next thing I did was kind of threw a question out there to see if she wanted to know the lesson from it, because sometimes we don't want to know the lesson because we're still in our feelings, right? When you lose somebody, you don't, you have a time of grieving. You don't want to move on right away. So I threw the question out of, well, it sounds like you're growing. And she looked, she kind of tilted her head and she's like, what? And then my next question was, let me know if you want to know. Because sometimes they don't want to know. Sometimes they want to stay in that,
Stay in their feeling.
Yeah,
Stay in that moment.
which is okay. Like I said, you kind of got to honor that. Yeah. And when you're ready, because if she's not ready to accept the help or the guidance, it's not going to work at all.
Yeah, you're wasting your time at that point.
And then she looked at me and she tilted her head and she's like, what do you mean? And so I was like, well, my girl, it sounds like this is something you've been asking for on a soul level. Now you know what you don't want. When your energy changes, everything changes around you, whether you like it or not. So people of that energy, the energy that you were, you're not anymore. So the people who are still here and don't want to grow will go away. So congratulations, you're growing. And she looked at me and she was like, huh. And you can tell almost like all her heart rate went away, because it wasn't about the other person anymore. It was about her and her growth, and just how beautiful it was set up and designed to be for her to.
And the opportunity that she just now had presented in front of her, like her excuses, all those other things were washed away, and it was like, wow.
So that was amazing. And so the next, after cognitive.
Yeah, so after cognitive, we start getting into emotional empathy. Now, this is where you start getting into the physical feels of things. This is where you start feeling sensations within your body, where you're able to relate to their pain, their suffering, their discomfort, whatever that may be. And a lot of that involves your imagination, on it, if you haven't gone through it. Now, if you're talking to a club of, amputees or something like that, and you are one also, you know exactly what's going through there. But when you start thinking about somebody's injury or a situation that, involves a pain that you haven't directly experienced, or maybe you've had affected in a different area of your body or somewhere really close, you can start feeling those types of pains, that discomfort. But it also goes beyond that. When somebody can talk about a situation, you start feeling anxious. You start feeling your blood pressure go up. You feel, your heart start beating faster. When you start having those physical sensations within your body, now you're getting into the emotional empathy, where your brain is receiving it and then sending physical sensations throughout your body. And that's why in a movie, for instance, you can watch a movie, you can see a sad scene, or you can see something that's emotional. What it does is it makes your body start releasing oxytocin, which then causes, it's known as the love emotion, which is Janita's favorite, but oxytocin starts kicking in and it makes it relatable to the situation. That's what makes you get in your feels. So when you have oxytocin released, that's what you're feeling as far as the sensations within your body, whether those be expressed by an anxiety, an increased, breathing, heart rate, or you feeling physical like pings, of sensations that are running through your body.
Yeah. So to put to look at it a different way. So when I think of empathy, I think of energy. That
Yeah.
is my to go to, and that's how you explain it. Empathy is effort, energy, and what was the other one you said?
Embedded. Yeah.
Embedded.
Yeah. So you
And
become
so,
more intertwined and you meet with them versus having a
so
guard up of sorts.
So how this, for me, how I translate this or I can interpret it in this way is, oxytocin is a hormone that is released throughout your body, right? And so we all know that they carry energy. So for you empath that really feel energy, that pretty much is what you are feeling or what's going through your body, right? You release a lot of that. And so, and what you're saying is energy, music, and what you see holds energy.
Frequency.
Frequency. I'm sorry, yeah, frequency. So if they use a certain words like sad, angry, all you can start to feel down, right? Your heart kind of drops. The other way I can relate this is if you're watching a movie without sound, you can relate somewhat. But if you start bringing music into it, like drumming is more grounding, right? Or if the tone is, in a kind of sad way,
Yep.
that's bringing in a freak. So you
Or it
feel it,
intensifies, like if it's a scary part of a movie.
yeah, or the drama.
Yep. Yep.
So I always look at it as an energetic kind of way. So for you empaths that can feel people, that's pretty much what's going in and around your body. You are connecting in that way.
Yep. So once you do the cognitive part where you're gaining your data, you're assessing the situation, you're acquiring all your info, and you're starting to process things by really the key in it is active listening. Hear what they are putting emphasis on, hear what is needed. And as we said, it's holding space. You're doing a whole lot less talking in that situation. Now, once you've acquired that data, now you're able to feel. Now, if you have that sensation where oxytocin's being released, you have past experiences where you've been through a similar situation and you can put yourself right back into that, that's where you're going to start feeling. And the coolest part about this is when you combine those two and they're balanced, now you're not thinking of it, from an emotional or egotistical kind of a way. Your heart and your head really start to align. When you have those two in balance, now you're able to speak and influence through wisdom rather than emotion. In that last segment, we talked about how emotions can control us, how they can overwhelm us, how they can make us make really bad decisions or say things that we really don't mean in situations. Once we've acquired all of that data, now we can start, moving forward in a balanced way from head and heart being aligned, as well as speaking from wisdom rather than being controlled by emotions.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that really starts tying the things together. Now, as we said towards the beginning, something that a lot of people have problems with is that's where you start getting into, once those two are aligned, you start getting into compassionate empathy and into empathetic concern. That's where you sit with people, you listen through the situation, you have a shoulder, they give them a shoulder to cry on, ear to listen. And then you start helping see through that situation where they see their positive outcome, they see their resolution without you actually telling them. So back to the situation where they lost their job or they got out of that relationship, that you thought that job wasn't right for them. You thought that relationship wasn't right for them. You took the time, and it's kind of the long route, where you listened, you understood, you felt with them, and you led them to ultimately that same resolution. Janita could have done in her example the same thing of listened for the entire time. She kind of cut it off at the pass with her, with the way that she approached it, but it was coming at it from a different angle. She could have sat and listened, understood what she was saying, made it relatable, and really left it with nothing, or left it with just the, you should move on, you can do better, you're right, go on, girl, you're good. That anybody else would say, but that doesn't really bring a solution or a perspective. And I think that's
Yeah.
really one of the things that helps mend and get those people out of that suffering is spending the time, taking the time, and going through it. Now, a lot of us have the problem where we assess, cognitively assess the situation too quickly. We haven't acquired enough info, processed things. We automatically jump to a conclusion of we know how they feel. We think, oh, that sucks, or we need to fix it. and you just dive right in with your empathetic concern, and you act like you cared, you just want to fix it and just have them get past it and move on. And that's where you get thought of as being insensitive, and not actually going through it.
Or that you don't care.
Yeah, it kind of goes back where, you might have been better just being sympathetic in the start and saying, man, that sucks, I'm sorry to hear that, and move on, rather than,
Yeah. And it kind of, there's like a fine line, right? You want to help them because you do care. And sometimes, like I said, we take away that experience from them to let them learn themselves. So another way of caring for them, because like you said, when you want to fix something or you don't want to see your child hurt anymore, you want to fix it because you care, right? But do you go a different route of caring? And that is to hold space for them, let them understand, learn, and through that, they will start to also understand they're self-aware and they're emotional intelligent. And you can help them realize that also. So with the lady that I was talking with, the hairstyle, because I understood self-awareness and emotional intelligence, the reason why I interject and wanted to change her perspective at the time was she broke up with her, boyfriend about an hour. I think it was like at the time 2 months. So that was long enough to where it's like,
Yeah.
okay,
2
now
months you shouldn't be ragging to your client about
yeah.
your situation. You should have been at least making some progress. So
Now, if she broke up with him the day before, then I'm like, okay, you got some time to, go through the process of a breakup.
yeah,
Because she's not ready to, to learn or to understand why this happened.
yeah. But to be in that same perspective 2 months later, still carrying that same baggage, you kind of needed to slap her upside the head a little bit with some realism just to kind of get it out.
So, yeah, so that's where,
Be that inertia.
like I said, our self-aware episode will help a lot. And then our emotional intelligent, understanding, seeing, listening, hearing the words, the cues and all that, you take that into consideration.
Yeah, process how that goes in and where it came from and why you feel that perspective of something. So getting into being empathetic, we can see examples of how that would help with leadership and mentorship roles. For myself with employees, sometimes, they can do their online education, they can do their classroom experience, they can study repair procedures, they can do any and every class, expose themselves to all these resources. But sometimes they just need to go out there and learn, and there becomes that point where you take off the training wheels per se, and you go through the process and you go through the fear, and like I said, with the empathy, one of the biggest parts, especially it's hard for men, especially leaders, things like that, is to be vulnerable. You're expected to be tough, be macho, be the one that has all the answers, if you're the leader. But in order to be empathetic, to relate with employees, to relate with other coworkers, you have to be vulnerable to an extent. And that requires a softer side in a lot of cases, rather than the suck it up and move on kind of a mentality.
It requires you to feel that emotion.
Yeah, and that's why I say it takes effort, energy.
Yeah, like I said, a lot of people don't want to feel it because it's viewed as a bad thing, right?
Yeah.
And it is like, nobody really wants to feel sadness. Nobody wants to feel if you're grieving for somebody, heartbreak. Nobody wants to feel that. But, and I guess that's the difference between being sympathetic and empathetic. And to be empathetic really does allow you to make that connection and to have that connection as a parent, as a manager, as a leader, as, in all that aspect. You are viewed different. You just have, gained a skill that not a lot of people will have and use. And, that's really, really sought after.
Yeah, and it is tough. And I've run into the same, into similar situations with that where, it's a fine line, like between work and life balance. And I really try to breed that with the people that I work with, I'm in contact with, is having that balance. I don't want you to have a lot of the stresses and everything from work and you're taking it home and it's impacting your personal life. And then also likewise, if you have things going on in your personal life, we understand well enough that we also don't want that to carry over into your work life, that there needs to be a degree of separation in there. But a lot of times as supervisors and leaders, you do run into people that have situations, and a lot of them will confide, in me, whether it is work related or not. And in those situations, I guess my point is I don't want to keep them there, much the same as you with that gal situation. 2 months have elapsed. If it was fresh, your approach would be much different.
Mm-hmm.
But in the example of times elapsed, you don't want them to have that victimhood mentality, so you want to approach it with a different perspective. You want to give them a different lens in order to be able to see that. In my experience, I had a situation where there was some infidelity that was involved, and the employee was the one that was kind of at fault with it. And I know there was a lot of backstory going on to the situation, but it was really affecting his job performance, his attendance, his, just wherewithal, during day-to-day operations. And in that, it's like I had to hold space and understand what he was going through. I couldn't just turn my back on him, but I also couldn't accept the behavior of what he was doing. I couldn't have him being inconsistent, not showing up, not doing the things that was his end of the bargain. Because at the end of the day, I got to look out for the entire herd. I got to look out for everybody else in the overall operation of the business. So you can have some empathy, you can have some understanding, but at the same time, I wasn't condoning the behavior. I also wasn't necessarily accepting of the behavior, but just had to let him know where those differentiating lines are. That he is expected to be there, he's expected to do his duty and do his tasks. Now, if he was unable to perform those or do those, then we'd have to figure out some other sort of resolution, but it's not fair to the other team, especially in this situation. It's not like he had something traumatic or unfortunate happen to him. It was something he had created. And so in there, he had to accept some form of ownership and realize how it was impacting our team and what he needed to do to still contribute to the team. And we did understand, but we weren't going to keep him in that same place. He needed to be in control of what he was in control of, and that was his attitude and his behavior. What was done, and all he could do is learn from it. So I approached the situation with him of understanding where he was at, what he was going on, asked him what his needs were, so that we could accommodate and make sure that it lined up with what we needed as a business. Also had, some of his coworkers were also familiar with the situation and willing to help out, help give some coverage, make some concessions, even if just temporary, to help see him through. So he could see where people were coming alongside of him, helping and supporting him, but he also knew that he had some duties that he needed to uphold. Now, it was a little bit rocky at first. I mean, for the first couple weeks, as he was clearly in his feelings, dealing with new stimulus, different emotions, I had a conversation with him, and I just told him, I said, it was really great. I said, it's very unfortunate that you're having to do it, but it's also really fantastic that now you're having to actually learn and feel these words that you've heard throughout your life. He's having to learn empathy. He's having to learn grace, forgiveness, compassion, understanding. He's having to learn and feel every one of those. And this young man was very overwhelmed by all of that. But I was able to recognize and understand that, and also just encourage him. It's like, no, you still got to take care of your responsibilities, your obligations, and most importantly, take care of yourself. And much the same as Janita's conversation with the hairdresser, it was like, now you don't have these things standing in your way. You have no excuse. You can start exercising, building better routines, taking care of yourself, start investing in yourself. What's done is done. You've already done your action. You don't have any more control over that situation. It's up to that other person to make their assessment and see what they wanted to do going forward.
Mm-hmm. And it really is hard not hard, but like I said, there's a fine line as a manager, as a leader, and also as a parent, because like I said, you want to fix everything, but where do you stop? I don't want to say disciplining them, but helping them learn. So your child can, if, and this is just an example, is, if they lost their friend in a tragic way, right? And then they start going off the bender of, they start drinking and all this kind of stuff. You cannot just stand by and let them do that.
No.
You still got to be a parent.
Yeah.
You still got to go up and be like, all right, you guys, there's a healthy way of grieving. There's a healthy way of doing other things. Let it go in a healthy way.
Right. Yeah, where it's
Yeah.
like I wasn't going to let like this young man. I mean, I know a lot of other people, would come alongside and were like, "Oh man, that sucks. I feel bad for you," and this and that. I wasn't, and I couldn't just feel bad for him. I knew what the situation was. He knew where his fault was, and he knew what he needed to do. If I was to say, "Oh yeah, man, I feel bad for you," and just let him be in that same situation and see him downwardly spiral as an employee, I'm doing him a disservice, by just sitting in observation. But there comes that line where it's like, okay, now it's crossing over to your work performance. Now I can interject some opinion because now it's affecting us in our situation. Like I said, without making it too personal or being preachy to him, I gave him an answer that nobody else had given him. And it's because I felt like I needed to. Also, in that situation, he didn't have anybody else that would have had probably the balls to tell him the things that he needed to hear in that.
Yeah.
And what was ironic is he did seek some counseling. He did have some other influences and things, and every single one of them echoed a very, very similar message. And he didn't see it or hear it at that time, but when he went out and sought help, those are the answers and stuff that he had received. So it was really pretty cool how it kind of came back around, and he ended up thanking me for it. And I know at that time when I was telling him, it was a really hard pill to swallow, and it probably felt like I was insensitive to him.
Yeah. And I'm pretty sure you guys as teenager have experienced that. Your mom telling you this and you're like, I don't want to hear it. Or
You don't understand.
I know everything.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
exactly.
You don't understand.
Yeah.
Little we know our parents knew. They
Right.
understood.
Absolutely. Yeah. Because you pull a lot of this empathy from your past experiences. And that's why I said the importance of it is you don't have to have gone through it to be able to be empathetic. You could have had similar situations, things that you've experienced, through friends, other loved ones, that helps make that situation relatable.
So before we go on, is there any questions or input or maybe a situation of your own that you want to ask? Well, we'll give it a few minutes because I did put that quote, and I don't know if I can remember it, but the only dumb question is the one that's not asked.
Yep.
Because I'm pretty sure, and I get this all the time, is I bet you a question that you have, somebody else is also wanting to ask it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just, probably not for yourself, but.
Yeah.
And I also love one of these things, like these gathering is like attracts like. So in a way, we are kind of thinking the same thing or wanting to know the same thing. Because if like attracts alike, most of you kind of are having the same question and concerns and stuff like that. Oh, we have a question.
Yeah. How to step back without trying to fix it for them is the most difficult for me to recognize. Absolutely. And that's where I say, like, I see it a whole lot more with guys, I think, because we all have that Mr. Fix-It attitude and stuff. That, yeah, it is hard to step back and let them go through it. Recognizing and assessing that situation, that's where the emotional intelligence and kind of reading your audience, reading your crowd comes into. Lord knows I've crossed wires plenty of times where Janita just wanted me to cognitively have some empathy and just listen, hold space, where I'm like, yeah, let's go, let's fix it. We got this, here's the solution. And it doesn't go as planned. It's also, I can even feel the situation and understand what she's going through. Have listened and probably acquired what I thought was enough info to process the situation. But that's where when those two things came together, they weren't necessarily balanced. Maybe I had my own emotions overruling what she was saying, and then I come up with a solution that worked for me, but isn't tailored to what she was looking for. Maybe she wasn't even looking for a solution at all, or for me to necessarily feel it, because if she's feeling down, there's times where it's like, well, hey, I'm kind of feeling bumming too, hey, I'm sorry, and you're listening, cognitively to what that person's saying, but you kind of feel a little bit depressed, sad, bummed out, kind of a thing too. And you're going, I don't want you to feel that way. It's my thing. I'm going through it. And it's like, I can't help but feel it because there's a connectedness, like we already
Yeah.
have that connectedness and energy and everything. So it doesn't take a ton of effort for me to be like, boom, I'm right there with you. And
Yeah. And those are the words I use is like, let me just go through it. I just need you to listen. I need you to fix it.
Yeah.
That's what I heard.
And then I'm like, figure it out. And you're like, no, that's not the answer I wanted.
Just listen to me. But in reverse, and I kind of do the opposite with him, is when he comes home or he has a situation that's difficult, I just listen. Right. And then maybe an hour later, he'll be like, do you have any suggestion? Do you have any input? I'm like, no, I'm just, yeah, I'm just holding space for you to talk about it, right?
Yeah.
To express it. And then until he says that, that's when I put my input, because that's when he wants to understand a higher or a different perspective of what the situation is about.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Well, and that's like, we just got on there, sometimes you just need to vent. Absolutely. You just need somebody to hear you out, know that you're not alone, that somebody's right there with you. And not offer up solutions, but that's where a lot of us just jump to it. It's like, I see you suffering, you don't need to be there, in that spot. Like, get over it, get past it. Where sometimes getting it out, Lord knows I've talked to you about different situations, and then, like I said, get it out, and I feel better about it. And as you said earlier, you speak it audibly, you hear yourself differently than the in your head self-talk portion. And you're like, wow, that does sound pretty foolish. Or, you're like, yeah, that does add validity to what I was thinking when
Yeah.
you say it out loud. And then the other person's like, yeah, you're 100% right for feeling that way, and validate your feelings and help get you in that right direction.
And for me, sometimes it's easier to call myself out when I say it out loud.
Yeah.
I'm like, son of a bitch, I'm wrong.
Yeah, I sound stupid. I should have said
Yeah.
that.
But to go back to Steve's question of it's hard to recognize, it was somebody, my mentor, who was just, she was hard, like really hardcore on me. And what she would do is when I got with her, she would tell me, things. As soon as I said something that was rejecting the lesson, she'll stop and she'll be like, go have your experience and come back to me when you're ready. As soon as she felt, seen, heard the first sign of rejecting the lesson or the different perspective or the knowledge, the wisdom that she had, she stopped and say, all right, just go back, or,
Go learn.
go
figure
learn,
it out.
come back when you're ready to learn it. That was it. And that was really hard. And I would just have to go and learn it. And she was freaking right. And so I would come back and be like, you're right. And then from there, I really started to understand, like, okay, this lady's knowledgeable in some crazy, I'm going to listen to everything. That's when I really shut up and listen.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the next question there, what do you deal with empathy in big crowds? So if you're dealing with big crowds energetically, how do you deal with empathy and deal with that? That can be a big of a challenge, because I guess Janita would probably go to a love conquers all and holding space for everybody, that they'll either just run away or they'll just submit to it, that they'll...
Well,
But in big crowds, it can be tough, because, yeah, there's definitely situations that I've been into and you've been into where you're like, this isn't the vibe that I'm on, this isn't the energy that I want, and you don't want to be drawn down to that level or have that affect you necessarily.
yeah, that one's a little bit, it was tough at the beginning when I really started to feel energy of crowds and places, situations, stuff like that. And the only way I taught myself to not feel those anymore was just to constantly tell my body or, universe, creator, whoever I was talking to, all right, I will only feel a place, situation, or person if I'm meant to help them. Every time that took a while for it to set in place. And then slowly and surely, I, kind of stopped feeling places, because I would go to the grocery store and come home with a headache. And I'm assuming there was a lot of people with headaches there.
Yeah.
And so I had to kind of set my foot or put my foot down and say, don't feel everybody. And that's telling my body that, right? So we are pretty much water.
Yep.
Our body, our cells are just waiting for us to be, or waiting for us to tell it what to do. And that's like, that's true. These are, they're like, what do you want us to do? So when you think, when you say, that's what you're telling your body to do. So, and that goes with the saying, be careful what you say, be careful what you think.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
So I told myself, don't feel everybody, only the people that you're going to help. And slowly my body kind of sort of adapted to that. And so now if I feel something and it's, I know that I have to help that person or that feel that land or whatever.
Yeah. And with me, when I find myself in crowds or situations, I always make it mindful, to have my armor per se on, to have my shield where I can still connect and empathize and speak with people, see and read my opportunity where I may be able to interject some empathetic concern, realize if I just need to just kind of listen, but also, like I said, shield myself so I'm not taking on everybody else's bullshit. I can find where, in my younger years before I was more consciously aware, how I would take on some of those other energies or that situation, and it would leave me feeling extremely drained or feeling agitated, upset, anxious, whatever. So really just kind of having a combo with self with what I'm going to allow and how I'm going to allow it. And then if I need to ground afterwards, if I need to really like recenter myself, or whether that be outside barefoot, be in a quiet space, just really reflect and process what that was. That's usually the easiest way I do it, unless I'm put in a position where I can influence the energy of the room, and in that aspect, try to start turning it towards a more positive nature, if that makes some sense, where if you happen to be a speaker at that certain event, or you are of importance at that event, or even in the case of where you're a leader, with that, you're the one that controls the energy. If I feel that the vibe of the entire shop or the people that I'm working with is down, I really need to have a combo with myself to make sure that I'm not putting off that energy and they're just mirroring me. Knowing that when you're in that, that role and responsibility of being in charge, if you will, you're in charge of the attitude and the energy, in a lot of cases, the behavior of the people, of identifying what's acceptable and not. So if everybody's kind of down in the dumps, you may need to look in the mirror first. If everybody's upbeat and doing good, it's probably a reflection of you. And if you're not of that same vibe, you need to start changing that, because you don't realize like what your influence and your impact is on the people around you. So in that crowd thing, if I'm given the opportunity to be that person that can influence it, if I'm one of the ones that's holding the meeting or I have an important role within it, I'll do everything in my power to swing the energy of that and change that perspective, whether that be during my speech or my presentation, or just knowing, if I know the room, I'll know the people that are in those positions, and I will work to help change the vibe of them and therefore elevate everything else within it.
I'm laughing a little bit because and maybe Monica, this is your case when you go out to public places like gatherings or the grocery store. I find myself, in La La Land.
Yeah.
I'm just
Do land.
Yeah,
she's just out doing her thing.
Yeah, and I am I'm not even aware of anything externally from me
she's
because
got her blinders on and she's just sunshine, rainbows, butterflies. She's just unaffected on it.
Yeah, and I just come, I focus really on my my energy and just really not, I guess, be aware of other.
Yeah.
Because I'm really immersed, just kind of like in myself or.
If you can ignore it, block it out, not even just have eyes to see it in the first place. Yeah, you're just kind of doing your own thing, vibing by yourself. But if you're in a situation where you have to be present in that room and it's like, ooh, this is really negative, or this really seems kind of down or draining.
Yeah.
And that just have a conversation more with self that I'm more powerful than anything else, and I control what's allowed in and not, and really just kind of block that out, or just Yes.
And I think that was my big thing is, you know, people who need help will come to me. Otherwise, why am I worried about it? And I
Yeah.
think that's
You
really
can't
made
fix everybody.
a difference with me. But so
Yeah.
what about working with difficult people?
Oh, with difficult people.
And I think we kind of touched on that too,
Yeah.
where it's like,
But
okay, go away until, you know, until you're ready.
yeah.
Then you can come back to me. I love you enough to go, and I will be here when you are ready.
Yes. Yeah. And that is, you can tell people all the answers. Like
Matt
dealing with
knows that one.
difficult, yes, dealing with difficult people is a challenge. We've actually had a lot of dialogue this week, and actually the podcast that we did yesterday touched on some of it with some fellow managers where, yeah, dealing with difficult people really tests your patience. Patience is a skill that I believe you acquire and you hone, as well as empathy and your ability to relate. But we were talking about a lot of the lines of where it borderlines tolerance. Tolerance, I believe, is a choice. So, there's a fine line between patience and tolerance. And in the example I did with the young man that I was working with at work was, I have patience through this situation, but I will not tolerate it. This will not be the new norm, because that goes against what we are, what we're about. So, dealing with difficult people, yes, they're going to test your patience. You can try to be empathetic. But as Janita said, at the end of the day, you might just need to tell them, hey, go figure it out, go learn, go have your experience, go listen, go firsthand, and then come back and report to me. Where, yeah, dealing with
I
difficult people, it's,
I think I take it as more of a self-respect thing.
yeah,
Tolerance, and I agree with what you said, but to me, I look at it as I respect myself enough for me not to put myself into situation.
yeah, that it crosses that line between patience, where you've been patient and waiting for that person to learn. And then there comes that point in time where now it's like they're clearly not learning, they're not listening, they don't value, they don't have respect for my opinion on situations. Are they being blatant in their behavior, where they're blatantly being disrespectful or combative? And in that's where it crosses that line to tolerance. And that's where I say tolerance is a choice. And there is, you can choose to deal with it or not. You have, the ability to, make a decision at that point, of, does this go against my values, my self respect, things like that? And it's time to part ways. Or do the good outweigh the bad? And even though they're not perfect on this one aspect, they really are really good at everything else.
Yeah.
And we as managers and leaders, it's not everybody's going to be perfect, not everybody's going to be like us, it's kidding, but it's yeah, it's always a challenge of some sort.
Okay. Crystal, did you have a question, or is that, I don't know when that raise hand?
Hi.
Yeah,
Hi.
go ahead.
I'm like currently in a work situation where, because I help with students, and so the teacher has been like that projecting his stuff onto me. And then when you were talking about tolerance and patience, it's like I have to be in class with him in 2 weeks because we go by, they do independent work and we're back in the classroom. I have to work with this person. So it's just like, oh, I have to tolerate it. And it's so disheartening.
Yeah, and they're not crossing a line that's just like being blatantly disrespectful or anything. You just don't have like a vibe with them, you don't see eye to eye, or maybe is your approach like dramatically different?
No, he was blatantly rude in like in front of the students with me with no reason. Like he just took a hit at me, and the students realized, like most of them are like the same age as me or older, taking a social work course. They understood why he was doing that. He was spoken to after by my higher up about that, but he continued the next class. So I guess, have to be tolerant.
Well, wait,
Yeah,
I'll leave that
or
to you.
yeah, what I would do is I would call them out. There's tactful ways of calling people out on their bullshit, and I'll just speak candidly on it. I mean, it sounds like it comes from a lack of, or an insecurity, or an inferiority, kind of a thing, possibly, depending upon what the context of it was. But in that situation, that person's revealing some sort of an inadequacy or a something to you where they feel they need to project or they need to do something to add validity to them. A lot of
Yes.
people that I deal with, everybody has an ego. And I feel there are two dramatic differences in egos. There's a big ego and there's a strong ego. I have a strong ego. A lot of other people have a big ego. Now, if you think of big versus strong, strong comes in a lot of different sizes. I've met dudes that are really, really small that are incredibly strong. I've also met really, really big people that are really strong. Strength comes in different sizes, different aspects. If you have a strong ego, you know what you are, you know who you are, you know what your values, you know what your morals are, and you will stand on business when it comes to that. Big egos generally have to be fed. You think of things that are big, they need to consume, they need to be fed, they need some sort of an input. Sounds as though this man has a big ego and it needs to be fed, and usually that is at, unfortunately, the expense of others. They need to lift themselves up at the expense of others. Look at how good I am because this person's inadequate. This person isn't as good as me. Now I'm starting to feel bigger and better because everybody else is inferior. And so you get a lot of people, unfortunately, that project outwardly that way. And it's because they feel inadequate, they feel intimidated, they're inferior in some way, and their only way is to lash out or project. So you can start calling some people out on those things by just simple little sentences that really you're just planting seeds. Otherwise you can really sting people with some of the things that you say too, where you don't have to say a whole lot of words. And not that I'm telling you that you need to be combative, but as you said on there on the comments, you ground yourself before class and find empathy for his ego. That's about all you can do and protect yourself. I mean, you're obviously not going to subject yourself to being belittled or berated, especially in front of the class. But you can see your opportunity in knowing those things, assess the situation. You might have just a one sentence zinger that just really puts people in their place, and that's a skill that I have and use occasionally but don't necessarily like.
Yeah, he has to deal with a lot of people. I mean, like a lot of clients that are
Yeah.
difficult. So it takes practice and skillful ways to handle these kind of situations.
Yeah, and without exposing your business too much and not setting you up for, like I said, a combative thing, because most people don't want conflict. They don't want any bullshit. It's you may say something in your own way, to identify or spotlight, if you will, his inadequacy or his insecurity, or a statement such as, well, if that helps validate your own inferiority or something along those lines, that can really shift the attention and maybe just even in that moment have that person go, wow, I do sound like an asshole, or I do sound like stupid or inappropriate or whatever at that point.
Or he would be like, she really sees me.
Yeah.
She really sees my, my lack of or my inadequacy where I am falling short at. And, in an emotional intelligent episode that we did, people with lower emotional intelligence are bullies.
Yeah. Yeah. They need to bully people. They need to do those things because they don't.
So he probably isn't aware of his lack or his emotions, right? So he just tends to project. He's probably feeling, in your case, I don't know, maybe less educated, or maybe it's just a gender thing for him. And that could go back to, his childhood or whatever the case might be. So he doesn't really know his own emotions at that point. He just knows how to project and belittle people because of his big ego.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So those are all great questions, guys.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's great.
And with that, you probably don't really want to connect with them. You probably really don't want to acquire more info and process, though you are still doing that cognitive empathy by having interactions with that said person. You don't really want to feel that sensation within your body, but you probably are left feeling some type of way. And maybe you don't have that opportunity to help them understand that perspective and really, lead them to an answer where they'll come to a better understanding. But shielding yourself, grounding yourself. Also, like I said, if you have that opportunity to call them out in a short, concise way, if you're listening to their bullshit enough, you'll know how somebody speaks, where they put emphasis on, what they value. And you may just have that opportunity to just yank on that one little thread that makes everything else just start to unravel. And that's really what I look for is I'll see where my little spot is, and it's I can just poke your heart, and it's just your heart.
Poke my heart.
Yeah.
There's a video meme that the little boy goes, "You poke my heart."
Yeah.
So that's what we're laughing about. Anyways, so I guess and also another way, just kind of stay clear of them, because I know you probably have people at places that you just kind of just stay out of their way, or in this situation.
And there are situations
maybe.
on there where, there's times where I have to work professionally with people that we may not see necessarily eye to eye on, but that's where you really have to get over your own ego and your own bullshit and just take care of a task, but also, like I said, still have those boundaries within there of what you're going to tolerate or not. And really just find a balance through the situation where you're protecting your energy, but also still doing your duties. And there's times, I'll bite my tongue because I've tried several different approaches and they haven't gotten through. So I just do what I need to do, move on, kind of, like what Crystal was saying, you got to do what you need to do, and then you just get over it, get through it, move on. But during each one of those interactions, I'm still paying attention where if I have that opportunity to yank that proverbial thread that's going to make everything else unravel. And I've had that happen, given some time, where after several interactions with that person in a set amount of time, you kind of find relatability in that person. Maybe their initial perception of you or their judgment of you wasn't right, and they start reconsidering that, and it gives you that opportunity to start connecting. And you'll even hear the, "Wow, I judged you wrong," or "I thought you were like this," or "I thought it was that." You've even experienced that with me, where initial read on somebody is wrong, and now you're trying to overcome that initial perception that person had that was misconstrued from the start. So in that case, maybe that person doesn't know you well enough,
Right.
Crystal, to know like what type of person you are or where your heart's at. And I guess what I or Janita would probably encourage you is to continue to show them, show compassion, show those things. But if they cross that boundary, be quick to put them back in their place. Let them know where you stand and what you're going to tolerate.
And that's a good word. I mean, that's the other thing I was going to come upon is compassion. Know that if it does trigger you in some way and it makes you feel off, there's something there that, with self that you need to fix. When you have compassion, you don't take things like that personal.
Yeah.
It doesn't really affect you in any way. You're just like, okay, I understand. I'm pretty sure this guy is going through something.
Yep.
In some kind, he's some kind of inadequacy or something, right?
Yeah.
That is making him be this way.
Yep.
Compassion. All right. He's just, there's nothing I can do about it except to have compassion for this guy. And that's one of the hardest things that a person can do, especially if you haven't fixed internally your own emotions.
Yeah.
So somebody who's difficult with me, I really don't take it personally anymore because I know it's something within them that they need to learn. And
thank you, Crystal.
yeah. And I'm not easily triggered or I'm not easily hung up on it.
Yeah.
I just go about my day and be like, oh, poor guy. Hopefully he gets his shit squared away.
Yeah.
Or, or tell him in a way like, hey, you need to talk later on. I'm here.
Mm-hmm.
Regardless of what he said or they said to me, because I know that's not about me.
Yeah. It's just their projection.
And that's where
because
the last episode, emotion intelligent. When you really understand their emotion and the word projection, what that looks like, you really understand not to take things personally anymore.
And with me on the thing, of being able to actively listen, And like I said, being able to come up with a concise response and everything is if you're actively listening and you are receiving what they are saying, you're listening to what their needs are, you hear where they're putting emphasis on, it's easy for you to hear their verbal talk. You can formulate a pathway then, or you can form a pattern to understand how they speak to themselves. And so what my innate ability to do is taking all those and blending them all together is I know how you speak, I know what you put emphasis on. Now in that situation, like with what Crystal was faced with, or if you have another situation with somebody that's difficult, after you've intake, enough of that data, now I can take a sentence that I know they say to themselves or something, like I can pick out their insecurity, their inadequacy, their whatever, and I can formulate a sentence as if I'm just speaking to them, but they hear it audibly from me, and it hits way different when somebody else says exactly what you're saying to yourself. And now they can have that aha moment. You pull that proverbial thread that really starts getting things to unravel, and it's kind of that oh shit kind of feeling, and in that moment, you kind of have your breakthrough.
So the other thing I really wanted to put emphasis on is to, in Matt's saying is when he knows how to pick up these words because he did the self work on self.
Yeah.
To self assess your thoughts, your feelings. When you start to navigate your own situation, your own mental state, your emotional state, all these things, you are better equipped to see all these other patterns that people are doing. So I really, when we are putting a lot of emphasis on that, is you really, really got to start with self. Yeah. In order to be a better parent, to be a better leader, to be a better husband, wife, friend.
Yeah.
And so it gets a little bit easier to be those things.
Right.
It
Absolutely.
really starts with self.
Starts with self, and then understanding your data feed. And then now you can start to understand others. And that's why I did a really deep dive, 12 years ago into psychology and philosophy, is I really wanted to understand myself. Why do I do some of the same things? Why do I do things when I'm happy, upset, frustrated? What do I seek for stimulus? Really just breaking myself down just to be a better me and figure out how to get out of my own way. But it also figured out a lot of things as far as relatability to others, understanding others' perspectives, that really helped dissect things down to become more empathetic, but also still while being rooted as a leader in what the standards, what the morals, the values of everything were, and not be ruled by emotion or be a leader that lashed out and really got frustrated. Most of the guys I work with have never heard me yell anymore because I haven't yelled in years. There's times I'll raise my voice, I'll put emphasis on things. They can absolutely tell when there ain't no more screwing around, but I don't have to yell and scream and turn red-faced and strain my voice and do all of those things. I can actually do quite the opposite. I can lower my voice. I can speak a little bit, slower, more directly, change my tone, alter some things that requires you to lean in and get the attention and receive the message versus the shutting down and thinking of a response. Yeah. That's why we started with the importance of self and then into that data feed of emotional intelligence, and now going into empathy now that we can understand what others are feeling, how they're feeling, where they're at, meet them in their perspective because we have a better understanding of our own. Now in our fourth series, where we'll wrap it up, is we're really going to break down communication. Now that we know ourselves, we know where those feelings are coming from, we know how others are feeling, now we can start communicating more effectively and we can start being heard, which, like I said and I've alluded to, ultimately that's what everybody wants, is they just want to be heard, they want to be understood, they want to be received. So our next episode, we're going to really start breaking down communication, how all of that works. And I think we'll have some interesting perspectives on there and tie this all together on how we can be better parents, better leaders, better mentors, and be better friends, be better, in relationships, both interpersonal and external.
So. Yeah. So I can't wait. I really can't wait for communication and tie this all together because, like you said, you don't yell anymore. You just change your tones. And I'm pretty sure you change your choice of words. 'Cause
Absolutely. You
words
use way
are
more impactful words, start understanding the meanings and everything of them. It can be a huge game changer, and that's why we backed into it, because everybody will say, you want to be better? Communicate. Why did things fail? It broke down because of communication. Well, if you don't understand self, you don't understand emotions, you don't understand empathy and how to connect to others, how the hell are you going to communicate? So that's why we're breaking it down into that. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. We appreciate your guys' feedback, and we'll see you guys again next week.
all right.
All right. Thank
Bye,
you guys.
guys.
See you later.